There exists a concept that permeates the architecture of modern human society, a phantom hierarchy that one encounters in the corridors of commerce, in the dynamics of social interaction, and in the quiet, unspoken assumptions about power, success, and survival. It is the concept of the alpha. The human mind is continuously conditioned to believe that the natural world is a theater of ruthless ambition, a vertical ladder where strength is measured exclusively by the capacity to subjugate others. The ultimate universally recognized symbol of this natural order is the alpha wolf, the dominant apex predator who has battled its way to the pinnacle of the pack through sheer force, unyielding aggression, and the incessant repression of its peers. The alpha is celebrated in literature, in business seminars, and in modern psychology as the absolute zenith of evolutionary success, a solitary sovereign demanding and receiving absolute submission from a terrified and subordinate collective. Yet, beneath this pervasive cultural monolith, beneath the endless metaphors of dominance and control, lies a profound and almost jarring truth. The alpha wolf does not exist. The entire foundation of this belief, the biological justification for countless human dominance narratives and societal structures, rests upon a tragic and deeply flawed illusion. The rules that truly govern the wild are infinitely more complex, infinitely more gentle, and entirely devoid of the tyranny humanity has so eagerly projected onto them. The alpha wolf is not a product of the natural world, but a ghost born in a concrete cage, an artifact of human interference and profound misunderstanding. It is a myth that the very scientist who popularized it has spent the latter half of his life desperately trying to erase from the collective consciousness. It is a revelation that requires the observer to gently, methodically unspool everything they believe about leadership, about nature, and about the fundamental mechanics of the wild. To understand the wolf is not to understand dominance, but to understand something much deeper, much older, and vastly more cooperative. If the listener enjoys diving deep into the intricate mysteries of the natural world and slowly unraveling the complex truths that govern existence, a like and subscription to help the channel is quietly appreciated. Such gestures allow for the continued exploration of these vast, hidden architectures. The mind is invited to settle, to let go of the rigid structures of the waking day, and to drift into the silent, snow-covered forests where the true narrative of the wild awaits. Now, let the descent begin. To understand the unraveling of a global myth, one must first travel back to the foundation upon which it was so meticulously constructed. The journey begins in the mid-20th century, a time when the scientific understanding of animal behavior, a field known as ethology, was still in its earliest, most formative stages. Ethology is the objective study of animal behavior, usually with a focus on behavior under natural conditions, viewing behavior as an evolutionarily adaptive trait. However, in the years immediately following the Second World War, observing elusive predators in their natural habitats was an endeavor fraught with logistical impossibilities. The technology for aerial tracking did not yet exist. Radiotelemetry was a distant dream, and the wild wolf was a phantom, vanishing into the deep timber long before a human observer could document its complex social interactions. Forced to adapt to the limitations of the era, early pioneers in animal behavior turned to the only subjects readily available to them, animals held in captivity. In the year 1947, an animal behaviorist named Rudolf Schenkel published a seemingly groundbreaking paper titled Expressions, Studies on Wolves Too. Schenkel sought to understand the social dynamics of these deeply misunderstood predators, but his methodology harbored a fatal flaw, one that would echo through the decades and distort human understanding for over half a century. Schenkel conducted his observations at the Basel Zoo in Switzerland. He assembled his behavioral data by watching wolves that had been collected from various, completely separate locations and placed together into a single artificial enclosure. In this captive setting, Schenkel observed a society fraught with agonizing tension, sudden violence, and rigid, unforgiving hierarchies. He noted the emergence of two primary wolves, a male he deemed the lead wolf, and a dominant female he referred to as the bitch wolf, describing them as the absolute first in the pack group too. These top-ranking individuals, Schenkel theorized, maintained their social position through the incessant control and repression of all types of competition within their own sex too. The wolves engaged in fierce, violent rivalries, constantly vying for status, food, and mating rights, in a bitter, never-ending struggle for supremacy too. Schenkel documented these battles meticulously, comparing the resulting hierarchy to the rigid pecking order of chickens, and from his observations in the concrete and iron confines of the zoo, the concept of the alpha animal was born. It is crucial at this juncture to let the mind pause and visualize the environment that birthed this theory. Imagine an artificial space, bounded by walls and fences, entirely disconnected from the sprawling, infinite expanse of the natural world. Within this confined space, unrelated apex predators, animals that, in the wild, would command and traverse territories spanning hundreds of square miles, were forced into perpetual, inescapable proximity, wary strangers to one another, stripped of their natural social structures, their autonomy, and their innate biological ability to disperse when tensions arose. 5. In the modern scientific literature, attempting to apply information about the behavior of assemblages of unrelated captive wolves to the familial structure of natural packs is recognized as a profound methodological error, a distortion of the highest order. 5. It is a scenario analogous to trying to draw sweeping universal inferences about human family dynamics by exclusively studying unrelated humans who have been forced together into the confined, high-stress, and resource-scarce environment of a refugee camp or a prison. Block 5. When unrelated individuals of almost any highly social species are thrown together in captivity, they will inevitably form a dominance hierarchy, an artificial and stressful ranking system of alphas, betas, and omegas, simply to manage the unnatural proximity and minimize lethal conflict over limited resources. 1. The violence, the repression, and the alpha status that Schenkel observed were not the natural state of the wolf, but the psychological trauma of captivity, manifesting as social dysfunction. 1. Yet, this crucial context, the artificiality of the cage, was lost to time and translation. The illusion of the dominant, warring pack felt simple, intuitive, and deeply resonant with human societal structures. It mirrored the human understanding of conquest and authority. This resonant illusion was subsequently cemented into the global consciousness 2 decades later by an American wildlife biologist named L. David Meck. In the late 1960s, Meck, who had spent several years studying wolves in Michigan's Isle Royale National Park, crafted a comprehensive book titled The Wolf: Ecology and Behavior of an Endangered Species 1. Because the scientific literature of the time offered no newer synthesis of wolf behavior since Schenkel's work in the 1940s, Meck relied heavily upon those early captive studies to explain the internal dynamics of the pack 4. Published in 1970, Meck's book inadvertently echoed the notions of competition-based hierarchies and popularized the specific term alpha wolf to describe the top dog ruling a group of similar-aged compatriots. 1. The book was a monumental, historic success. It was republished in paperback in 1981, eventually circulating over 120,000 copies, and served as the foundational text for almost all other general books, documentaries, and articles on wolf biology that followed for the next 30 years too. Through this single, highly influential text, the misinformation regarding alpha wolves was spread far and wide, bleeding irreversibly out of the quiet realm of zoology and soaking into the very fabric of popular culture. 1. The alpha wolf paradigm became a distorted lens through which humanity viewed not only the wild, but itself. It birthed the flawed dominance theories that would plague domestic dog training for decades, operating on the tragic assumption that dogs, descending from wolves, must naturally adhere to an alpha-based social hierarchy, requiring their human owners to dominate and repress them to maintain order too. It infiltrated corporate boardrooms, self-help seminars, and sociological frameworks, all operating on the mistaken belief that the natural inclination of a leader is to conquer, repress, and dominate their subordinates. The world embraced the alpha, entirely unaware that it was venerating a shadow cast by a cage. To find the truth, to peel back the layers of this pervasive illusion, one must leave the rigid walls of the zoo and the printed pages of mid-century textbooks and embark on a methodical descent into the true, untamed wild. In the 1990s, David Mech, the very scientist who had inadvertently popularized the alpha myth, found himself living among and studying free-living wolves on Ellesmere Island, located in the high, freezing expanse of the Canadian Arctic Four. Here, in the sprawling glacial silence of the tundra, unbound by fences, concrete, or artificial constraints, the hidden mechanics of the natural world slowly began to reveal themselves. What Mech observed over years of meticulous patient field research completely shattered the prevailing paradigm he had once helped to build. The reality of the wild wolf was not a reflection of human political struggle. Instead of witnessing a tense, dominant-subordinate pack hierarchy fraught with power struggles and violent usurpation, Mech observed something profoundly familiar, incredibly functional, and deeply gentle. The typical wild wolf pack is not a gang of unrelated individuals vying for dominance. It is simply a family one. The intricate, hidden mechanism driving the apex predator of the Northern Hemisphere is not violent subjugation, but kinship. To understand this, one must allow the mind to map the structure of a wolf pack, not as a corporate ladder or a military regiment, but as a multi-generational household. At the quiet core of the pack are the breeding male and the breeding female one. These individuals are not alphas who have won their exalted status through bloodshed, intimidation, or the continuous repression of their peers. They are simply the parents of the other wolves in the group too. The offspring follow their parents as naturally, as willingly, and as instinctually as offspring would in almost any other social species too. There is no battle for the top position because the leaders of the pack are naturally deferred to by virtue of their age, their deep experience in navigating the perilous landscape, and their biological role as caregivers too. Calling a breeding wolf an alpha, Mech later argued with profound clarity, is no more appropriate than referring to a human mother or a human father as an alpha, or calling a doe deer the alpha of her fragile fawn 3. Any parent is naturally dominant to its young offspring, rendering the term alpha completely devoid of useful behavioral information. To say a father dominates his toddler is a technically true, but contextually absurd statement. It misses the fundamental essence of the relationship, which is guidance, protection, and love. Let the mind wander through the actual daily mechanics of this beautiful familial architecture. In the wild, the pack operates on a highly cooperative division of labor system, a delicate balancing act designed to ensure the survival of the genetic line against the unforgiving elements. 1. The breeding female predominates primarily in activities revolving around pup care, the meticulous maintenance of the den, and the fierce defense of her vulnerable young 3. The breeding male predominates primarily in the grueling tasks of foraging, food provisioning, and guiding the extensive, exhausting travels associated with the hunt 3. The younger wolves in the pack, often the pups of the current year, and the adolescent yearlings from the previous spring, do not plot mutinies. Instead, they act as older siblings, assisting in the rearing of the newest litter, playing with the pups, and slowly learning the incredibly complex, coordinated skills required to survive and hunt large prey 5. Historically, researchers observing the wild from a distance attempted to map the old captive models onto these harmonious families, utilizing academic frameworks like the age-graded model of dominance 8. This term, advanced in behavioral ecology, simply describes a natural, peaceful order where offspring submit to parents and younger puppies submit to both parents and their older siblings. 8. But to view this solely through the cold political lens of a dominance hierarchy is to profoundly misinterpret the fundamental emotion of the interaction. When earlier researchers noted behaviors they classified as submission, such as a younger wolf crouching low to the ground, pinning its ears back, or enthusiastically licking the muzzle of an older returning wolf, they interpreted this through Schenkel's lens of a defeated rival surrendering to a tyrannical sovereign 5. However, a closer, unclouded observation of the microscopic mechanics reveals a completely different, almost touching reality. This active submission posture, characterized by the younger wolf eagerly licking up to the mouth of the older animal, is actually a juvenile food solicitation behavior 6. It is a deeply ingrained instinctual carryover from early puppyhood, where tiny pups lick the muzzles of returning adults to stimulate them to regurgitate warm, partially digested meat from the hunt 5. When a massive 100-pound yearling exhibits this exact behavior toward a parent, it is not a declaration of political defeat. It is the lingering echo of an infant begging for sustenance, a bonding ritual that reinforces familial affection, care, and the joy of reunion after a long separation 5. Even the passive submission posture, where a wolf rolls entirely onto its back and exposes its vulnerable underside to another, was misinterpreted as the ultimate sign of capitulation in a competitive triad. In reality, it is a natural extension of a pup presenting its belly to a mother for grooming and cleaning, an act of profound, absolute trust and comfort rather than a terrified concession of power 5. Furthermore, the notion that younger wolves remain in the pack biding their time, waiting to eventually overthrow the aging alpha and claim the throne, is a complete and utter fabrication too. In the wild, wolves do not possess an innate sense of rank, nor are they born as predetermined leaders or subservient followers too. As the pups grow older, reaching 1 to 3 years of age, their natural biological imperative, the silent, ancient clockwork of their genetics, guides them gently away from the natal pack too. They disperse, wandering alone across the vast frozen landscapes until they find a mate of their own, establishing a new, unoccupied territory, having their own pups, and thus forming a completely new family unit too. The cycle of life in the wild is not a cycle of usurpation, betrayal, and conquest, but a graceful cycle of maturation, departure, and the quiet, continuous genesis of new families too. Realizing that the central thesis of his most famous work was fundamentally biologically flawed, David Mech embarked on a brave, decades-long mission to correct the scientific and public record for. In 1999, after years of accumulating unassailable field data from his time in the Arctic, Mech published a definitive corrective paper in the Canadian Journal of Zoology titled Alpha Status, Dominance, and Division of Labor in Wolf Packs 1. In this paper, he systematically dismantled the alpha paradigm, stating unequivocally that the concept of the alpha wolf as a top dog ruling a group of similarly aged compatriots is particularly misleading, and he formally proposed that science abandon the term altogether in favor of accurate descriptive terms like breeding male, breeding female, or simply pack parents 1. Yet the absolute boundary of human knowledge is not always defined by a lack of data, a lack of observation, or a lack of scientific rigor. Often, the absolute edge of our understanding is defined by the psychological gravity of the myths we choose to believe. This introduces the profound, almost haunting paradox of the alpha wolf paradigm. Science is fundamentally a dynamic process, a beautiful, self-correcting mechanism designed to constantly refine its understanding of reality as new evidence emerges from the dark one. When the data changes, the paradigm must shift. However, changing a concept that has routed itself so deeply into the cultural imaginary, a concept that has become a load-bearing pillar for how humanity understands power, is an incredibly, sometimes impossibly arduous task one. Even after Mech published his retraction, even after subsequent highly detailed statistical studies validated that wild packs are simply families exhibiting perfectly transitive hierarchies based solely on age and parentage, where deference flows naturally downward from parent to child without the need for conflict. The idea of the alpha wolf persisted with a stubborn, almost immune resilience. The image of the snarling, dominant alpha was too intoxicating to surrender. It took decades for popular publications, nature documentaries, and sociological textbooks to even begin to reflect the corrected science, and the term remains deeply, frustratingly embedded in the modern lexicon today. To minimize the ongoing cascading damage of his earlier work, Mech took the extraordinary, highly unusual step of actively petitioning his own publishers to cease printing his best-selling book. It was a testament to his scientific integrity that he fought against his own legacy, eventually succeeding in having The Wolf taken permanently out of print in 2022, over 50 agonizing years after its initial publication. This persistent cultural stubbornness, this refusal to let the alpha die, reveals an awe-inspiring clue to a deeper truth about human nature. The deepest mystery in this narrative is not ecological, but psychological. Why did humanity cling so fiercely to the myth of the alpha long after the scientists who created it begged the world to let it go? The answer lies in the profound, unconscious phenomenon of psychological projection. When humans looked at the captive wolves pacing their enclosures in the mid-20th century, they did not see the wolves as they truly were. They saw a mirror reflecting their own anxieties, their own rigid social architectures, and their own deep-seated fears regarding competition, scarcity, and survival. The human mind, steeped in the historical mechanics of warfare, capitalism, and steep hierarchical power, looked into the zoo enclosure and projected its own massive looming shadow onto the animals within. The alpha wolf became a comforting biological justification for human ruthlessness. If the natural world, the pure and untamed wilderness, was governed by brutal dominance and the repression of the weak, then human dominance was natural, justified, and inevitable. It provided an evolutionary alibi for greed and authoritarianism. To accept that the apex predator of the wilderness governs its society not through violence, but through cooperative parenting, quiet division of labor, and enduring familial love, requires a profound and unsettling humbling of the human ego. It asks the observer to dismantle their own internalized hierarchies. It challenges the deeply held assumption that strength is inherently, inextricably tied to subjugation. The paradox is that the true wild, the unforgiving, freezing, and lethal reality of the natural world does not reward the tyrant. It requires deep, unyielding cooperation to survive. In the wild, the lone, aggressive individual, constantly picking fights and alienating its peers, does not thrive. It perishes in the snow. It is the family, bound by invisible threads of mutual care, shared labor, and profound loyalty, that endures the glacial winters. The unsolved problem at the edge of our knowledge is not how wolves behave, but how long it will take for human society to fully absorb this biological truth. How long will it take for humanity to unlearn the artificial violence of the cage and to embrace the quiet, enduring wisdom of the family unit as the true, ultimate pinnacle of evolutionary success? As this deep, methodical descent draws to a close, the mind is left to reflect upon the majestic, quiet reality of the natural world. Stripped of its human projections. The deconstruction of the alpha wolf paradigm is not merely the correction of a minor zoological footnote. It is a profound philosophical realignment. It tells the observer something immense, something breathtaking about the nature of reality, existence, and the intricate webbing of life on this planet. The universe, at its core, is not entirely a theater of endless war, subjugation, and domination. The complex mechanics of survival, honed and polished over millions of years of unforgiving evolution, ultimately favor connection over conflict. The wild favors nurturing over narcissism, and the gentle, patient guidance of the next generation over the accumulation of absolute, solitary power. Let the imagination drift, for a moment, to a family of wolves moving silently through the deep, snow-laden timber of the high Arctic night. There is no dictator driving them forward from the rear, no sovereign demanding submission with bared teeth. There is only a mother and a father, quietly carving a path through the heavy drifts, followed closely by their growing, learning offspring. They move as a single breathing organism, a symphony of cooperation perfectly attuned to the harsh and beautiful rhythms of the earth. They hunt together, they rest together, and they survive together, governed not by fear, but by the ancient, unbreakable laws of kinship. In understanding their true nature, humanity is offered a mirror of an entirely different kind, a reflection that does not justify our cruelty, but rather invites vastness, humility, and a deep, enduring peace. The wild is not a place to conquer, it is a place to understand. And in the quiet, undeniable truth of the wolf pack, one finds the comforting realization that the deepest, most powerful force in the natural world is not dominance, but the simple, enduring bond of family, persisting long into the silent canopy of the stars.